Archaeologists have begun a major new excavation of the Roman city of Pompeii. It was destroyed nearly 2,000 years ago after Mount Vesuvius erupted.
The mother, cradling her child in the house of the golden bracelet, has been a tragic icon since Giuseppe Fiorelli created the plaster casts in the 1860s. For 150 years, guidebooks swore this was a family frozen in the 79 AD eruption. But 2024 DNA research by Gabriele Scarano shatters that narrative. It turns out the mother was actually a man, and the child was a total stranger from the Eastern Mediterranean. So how did those 19th century excavators turn a handful of bones into this heartfelt family fairy tale? The myth they sold us. When Giuseppe Fiorelli took over the Pompeii excavations in 1860, the city wasn't just a dig site, it was a chaotic graveyard being picked apart by treasure hunters. Fiorelli changed everything by introducing a systematic, scientific approach to the ruins, but in doing so, he accidentally created one of the most enduring pieces of historical fiction in human history. You've likely seen the images, those haunting, ash-colored figures frozen in their final, desperate moments. But what most people don't realize is that these aren't actually bodies. They're plaster shells of the spaces where people once were. As the bodies of the victims decayed over 18 centuries, they left behind hollow voids in the solidified volcanic ash. Fiorelli's genius was in realizing that if you pumped liquid plaster into these pockets, you could recreate the exact shape, clothing, and even the facial expressions of the person at the moment Vesuvius claimed them. It was revolutionary. By the time he finished his tenure in 1875, he'd created over 1,100 of these eternal poses. But here's the thing. While the technique was scientific, the interpretation was pure storytelling. According to research from the Harvard Medical School, the most famous of these discoveries happened in the House of the Golden Bracelet. Archaeologists found a group of 5 skeletons huddled together in what looked like a final, tragic embrace.
As Valeria continues to work on the fragile skeletons, she wants to understand how these people died.
There was an adult holding a small child on their lap, with another adult nearby. Without a second thought, the 19th century excavators labeled them a family. In their minds, it was obvious, a mother and father trying to protect their children as the world ended. Honestly, this wasn't just a simple observation. It was a total projection of Victorian values. Stephen Ellis, a Pompeii expert over at the University of Cincinnati, points out that those early archaeologists were basically swimming in the romanticism of their own era. They were completely obsessed with things like family piety and moral unity. So naturally, when they saw 2 people touching, their brains didn't even go to 2 strangers seeking comfort. Nope, they saw a family. They were desperate to turn Pompeii into a mirror of their own society, a place filled with traditional households and rigid social structures that made sense to them. You have to understand the pressure Fiorelli was under. In the mid-1800s, Italy was struggling to find its identity as a unified nation, and Pompeii was the perfect propaganda tool. According to historical records from the Pompeii Archaeological Park, Fiorelli wasn't just a digger, he was a creator of national heritage. He needed the world to see the Romans as the direct, noble ancestors of the modern Italian family. By labeling a group of bodies as a mother, father, and child, he wasn't just guessing, it was branding. He was making the tragedy relatable to a 19th century audience who valued the nuclear family above all else. But here's where it gets even more calculated. According to excavation logs from the 1860s, Fiorelli's team often cleaned the skeletons before pouring the plaster. If a bone looked like it belonged to a child, but was found near an adult who didn't fit the mother profile. They would sometimes rearrange the debris to make the final cast look more natural or poignant. They weren't just preserving a moment in time, they were directing a scene. They turned a chaotic, messy death into a clean, moralistic statue. This curated death was exactly what the public wanted, and it's the reason these myths stood unchallenged for over 150 years. And get this, the family from the House of the Golden Bracelet didn't just stay in the dirt, it became a global sensation. These casts actually toured museums all over Europe and eventually the rest of the world, acting as these heavy, poignant moral lessons on how fragile life is. Think about it. Millions of people have stood right in front of these displays, feeling this massive, gut-wrenching emotional connection to a mother and her child that, as it turns out, weren't actually a mother and child at all. We've seen them in countless documentaries and history books, always cited as the ultimate proof of the domestic tragedy that unfolded on August 24th and 25th, 79 AD. But as SciTech Daily notes, these poses were interpreted entirely through a cultural lens, not a biological one. Fiorelli's own memoirs even mention the poignant groups he uncovered, showing that he was well aware of the emotional power these casts held. In many cases, excavation logs suggest that the teams knew the skeletal anatomy didn't perfectly align with the labels they were handing out, but the narrative was too good to pass up. They chose the story over the evidence because a family sells more tickets and captures more hearts than 5 unrelated individuals. The problem is that once these labels were set in plaster, they became hard facts in the public consciousness. For 150 years, no one really questioned if the woman with the child was actually a woman, or if the people huddled together even knew each other. We just took the Victorian word for it. It's a classic case of seeing is believing. The physical presence of the cast makes the lie feel undeniable. It makes you wonder about the power of curation. Think back to your own life. What museum display or historical fact did you see as a kid that totally tricked you? Maybe it was a dinosaur pose that turned out to be wrong, or a primitive tool that was actually a ritual object. We trust these institutions to give us the truth, but they're often just giving us the best guess of the person who happened to be holding the shovel that day. In the case of Pompeii, that best guess wasn't just a minor error, it was a total rewrite of the city's social fabric. By forcing these victims into the mold of a nuclear family, archaeologists accidentally erased the true diversity of one of the Roman Empire's busiest port cities. They turned a complex, multicultural hub into a simplified Victorian stage play. But here's where the tragedy of the situation gets even deeper. The very process Fiorelli used to preserve the memory of the victims actually ended up jeopardizing our ability to ever truly know them. The plaster isn't just a shell, it's a chemical contaminant. For decades, it was believed that the gypsum used in the 1860s had effectively destroyed any chance of ever retrieving biological data from the bones trapped inside. They built the myth with plaster and prejudice, creating a version of the past that was comfortable and easy to understand. But cracking that plaster open took a century of science. We had to wait for technology to catch up to our curiosity. How did researchers finally pull DNA from ruins that seemed designed to destroy it? And what did they find when they finally looked past the Victorian lens? Pompeii's hidden diversity. 10 out of the 14 victims analyzed in this 2024 study showed genetic profiles that were anywhere from 40 to 60% Eastern Mediterranean. We're talking about people whose roots trace back to Greece rather than the local Italian countryside. According to reports from SciTech Daily, this autosomal DNA clustering was so dominant that it completely flips the script on what a Roman town actually looked like. For centuries, we've pictured Pompeii as this isolated, quintessential Roman village, but the DNA proves it was actually more like an ancient New York City, a massive trade hub where the world converged. Think about the sheer scale of the movement required to make this happen. Pompeii was a port city of about 11,000 people, and its docks were constantly buzzing with ships bringing in grain, textiles, and slaves from the far reaches of the empire, all living side by side until the mountain literally collapsed on top of them. Here is where it gets truly interesting. When you look at the victims from the House of the Golden Bracelet again, knowing they were unrelated men from the Eastern Mediterranean, the scene changes from a family tragedy to a story of shared humanity among strangers. Maybe they were workers in the same shop, or travelers who met at the docks and fled to the same house for cover. It makes the disaster feel less like a closed-off historical event and more like a modern crisis where people from all walks of life are suddenly thrown together by circumstances they can't control. That's the new Pompeii. It's a place that was built by the hands of people from Anatolia and North Africa, managed by Roman law, and eventually frozen in a way that tricked us for over a century. But with truths this big finally coming to light, you have to wonder what else we've gotten wrong. What other facts are sitting in museums right now, just waiting for a drill bit and a DNA sequencer to prove they're actually just fairy tales? We're finally starting to see the real faces of the ancient world, and they look a lot more like the world we live in today than we ever dared to imagine. For over a century, we mourned a fiction, while the real stories of these people waited silently in their bones. The DNA shatters those 19th century family tales, proving the victims were often unrelated strangers from across the globe. As Harvard Medical School points out, this completely challenges the stories we've told ourselves about Pompeii. With digs continuing through 2025 and beyond, history is still being rewritten. What history lie should DNA bust next? Drop your thoughts below. Which myth hits you hardest?